The northern territories had learned to fear the winter winds, but they feared Kieran Bloodworth more. For 300 years, the Bloodworth dynasty had ruled the 5 kingdoms with an iron fist wrapped in velvet promises and broken oaths. But Kieran was different. Where his ancestors had been cunning tyrants, strategic in their cruelty, Kieran was a force of nature, unpredictable, absolute, merciless. They called him the Wolf King, though never to his face. His eyes held the cold calculation of a predator, pale amber that seemed to glow in the darkness of his throne room. At 6'5", he towered over most of his court, his presence a physical weight that made even his generals struggle to meet his gaze. "Another petition, Your Majesty," Lord Garrett said, his voice carefully neutral as he placed the parchment on the obsidian desk. Kieran didn't look up from the military report spread before him. From the Omega Sanctuary in the Eastern Province, they're requesting, denied. "Your Majesty, they haven't had supplies in 3 months. The mountain passes are treacherous because I ordered them destroyed." Kieran's voice was soft, almost pleasant. That was how his court knew he was at his most dangerous. "The Eastern Province harbored traitors. They can starve or submit. I don't particularly care which." Lord Garrett swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Majesty." Kieran had ascended to the throne at 23, after the suspicious death of his father. No one dared question it. The old king had grown soft, they said, too willing to negotiate with the lesser territories. Kieran had no such weakness. Within his first year, he'd crushed 4 rebellions, dissolved the Council of Mediators, and instituted laws that made even the darkest days of his grandfather's rule seem gentle by comparison. He was 30 now, and his reputation had only grown more fearsome. Omegas had it worst of all. In a world where pack dynamics still governed social hierarchy, Omegas were already vulnerable, their heats making them dependent, their biology marking them as lesser in the eyes of traditionalists. But under Kieran's rule, new edicts had stripped away what few protections they'd gained over the centuries. An Omega is property until claimed, and property of the state if unclaimed, declared his most infamous law. Sanctuaries that had once offered refuge now operated on the edge of starvation, receiving only what the crown deemed necessary, which was never enough. When his advisors suggested he take an Omega mate to produce an heir, Kieran had laughed. It was a terrible sound, devoid of warmth. "Why would I bind myself to something so weak?" he'd said. "I'll take a strong alpha when I need heirs, someone worthy of the Bloodworth name." He bedded alphas and betas as he pleased, always dominant, always in control. But Omegas, they were beneath his notice. Tools for labor, bodies for breeding, if they were lucky enough to be claimed by someone with means. Nothing more. Tonight, as he sat alone in his chambers reviewing execution orders, Kieran felt the familiar emptiness that had lived in his chest since childhood. He'd long ago decided it was strength, the absence of sentiment, the clarity of purpose unmuddied by emotion. His mother had been an Omega. She died when he was 7, and he barely remembered her face. What he did remember was his father's grief, how it had made the old king weak, manipulable. Kieran had sworn he'd never allow such vulnerability. Love was a lie. Compassion was weakness. Power was all that mattered. He signed the last death warrant with a flourish and set down his pen. Tomorrow, he would tour the northern work camps. It was time to remind them who held their lives in his hands. Rain hammered against the broken windows of the eastern Omega Sanctuary, and Isla pressed herself deeper into the corner of the storage room, trying to disappear. She was 22 and weighed barely 100 pounds. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face that might have been pretty once, before hunger had hollowed her cheeks and fear had carved permanent shadows under her gray eyes. "Check the back rooms," A guard's voice echoed through the corridor. His Majesty wants a full count. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs. The king was coming. The Wolf King himself, making a surprise inspection of the territories. Please, she whispered to no one, to the darkness, to the universe that had stopped listening to her prayers years ago. Please, not today. She'd been at the sanctuary for 5 years, ever since her family had been killed in the Eastern Rebellion. She'd been 17, just presented as an Omega, when soldiers had burned her village. She'd hidden in a root cellar, while her parents and younger brother died above her, their screams mixing with the roar of flames. The sanctuary had taken her in, one of dozens of displaced Omegas with nowhere else to go. It wasn't much. The building was old, the food scarce, the winters brutal, but it was safe, or it had been. Under King Kieran's rule, even that small mercy was being stripped away. Found one, the guard called out, and rough hands yanked Isla from her hiding place. She was dragged into the main hall with the others, 37 Omegas, all thin, all terrified. The sanctuary's director, an elderly beta woman named Marta, stood with her hands clasped, her face grave. The doors opened. King Kieran entered like a storm front, cold and devastating. Isla had never seen him in person, but his portraits didn't capture the terrible magnetism of his presence. He moved through the hall with predatory grace, his long black coat sweeping behind him, his pale eyes assessing everything with calculated disdain. "This is your entire population?" His voice carried effortlessly across the space. "Yes, Your Majesty," Marta said, bowing deeply. "Pitiful." He gestured to his captain. "Document them. Any in heat?" No, Your Majesty," Marta stammered. "The suppressants you've allowed us are more than you deserve." Kieran's gaze swept over the assembled Omegas, and Isla felt his eyes pass over her like a cold wind. She kept her gaze down, trying to be invisible, trying to be nothing. "You harbor laziness here," Kieran continued. "I see able bodies wasting space. Starting next month, your rations will be cut by half. Those who cannot work will be relocated to the labor camps." A quiet sob broke out from somewhere in the line. Isla bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "Your Majesty, please," Marta said, and Isla heard the desperation in her voice. "They're already starving. Half rations will motivate them to be useful." Kieran turned to leave, then paused. "Or they can die. I'm indifferent either way." Something inside Isla snapped. Maybe it was the hunger, the constant fear, the 5 years of swallowing her voice. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, who had taught her that Omegas were not lesser, no matter what the world said. Or maybe she was just tired of surviving. "We're already useful," she said. The hall went deathly silent. Kieran turned slowly, and Isla felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. "What did you say?" Her legs were shaking, but she stepped forward. "I said we're already useful, Your Majesty. We work in the fields, in the kitchens, the textile mills. We contribute. We're not lazy. Isla, don't..." Marta's voice was strangled with fear, but Isla couldn't stop now. "You treat us like we're nothing, like we're disposable, but we're people. We have value beyond what we can produce for your kingdom." Kieran crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Up close, he was even more intimidating, massive and cold, his scent heavy with alpha dominance that made her Omega instincts scream at her to submit, to kneel, to bare her throat. She locked her knees and held his gaze. "You dare speak to me this way?" His voice was soft, deadly. "Someone has to." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "You're killing us slowly. Is that really strength? Or is it just cruelty?" For a long moment, Kieran simply stared at her. His expression was unreadable, those pale amber eyes studying her face like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then he smiled. It was a terrible thing, sharp as a blade. "What's your name?" "Isla." "Isla." He tasted her name like wine. "You're brave, or perhaps just stupid. It's hard to tell. Does it matter?" "No." He turned to his captain. "Bring her." "Your Majesty?" The captain looked confused. "I said bring her to the palace." Kieran glanced back at Isla, and something flickered in his eyes. Let's see how long that fire lasts. The journey to the capital took 3 days, and Isla spent most of it in a cramped carriage, her wrists bound with silk rope that was more humiliating than painful. She'd expected chains, expected a cage. The silk rope felt like mockery. The palace rose from the center of the capital city like a dark crown, all black stone and sharp towers with windows that looked like watching eyes. Isla had never been to the capital before. Her village had been small and remote, and after its destruction, she'd never left the sanctuary grounds. Now, she was being dragged into the heart of the kingdom's power, and she had no idea why. They led her through corridors of polished obsidian and cold marble, past guards who didn't meet her eyes, and servants who scurried away at the sight of her. Finally, she was deposited in a room that was nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. A bedroom, with a real bed piled with furs and pillows, a fireplace already crackling with warmth, a bathing room attached, with a copper tub large enough to drown in. "What is this?" she asked the guard who'd escorted her. "Your quarters." He sounded uncomfortable. "You're to stay here until His Majesty summons you. And then?" The guard didn't answer. He left, and she heard the lock click behind him. Isla sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. This made no sense. If Kieran wanted to punish her, there were dungeons. If he wanted to make an example of her, there was the execution square. Why bring her here? Why give her a room that would have housed a noble? She didn't have long to wonder. That evening, as she was finishing a meal that had been brought to her room, more food than she'd seen in months, the door opened without warning. Kieran entered, alone, still in his black coat, but with his formal regalia stripped away. He looked somehow larger in the enclosed space, his presence filling every corner. "Stand up," he commanded. Isla stood, her heart racing. He circled her slowly, studying her like she was livestock at auction. "You're severely malnourished, undersized even for an Omega, weak. Then why am I here?" "Because you interest me." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "No one has spoken to me the way you did in 5 years. Most people can barely breathe in my presence, but you looked me in the eye and called me cruel." "You are cruel." His lips quirked. "Yes, I am." He reached out and caught her chin, tilting her face up to the light. His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with everything she knew about him. "But you already knew that. You knew what I could do to you, and you spoke anyway. Why?" Isla's throat was tight. "Because I was tired of being silent, tired of pretending it doesn't matter." "And what did your defiance accomplish?" His thumb traced her jawline. "Your sanctuary's rations are still cut. Your people still suffer. And now you're here, at my mercy, with nothing and no one to protect you." "I know. Then you're a fool." "Maybe." She met his eyes. "But at least I'm not a coward." She saw the flash of anger in his gaze, swift and hot. His hand tightened on her chin, just shy of painful. For a moment, she thought he might strike her, might kill her where she stood. Instead, he released her and stepped back. "You'll stay here," he said coldly. "You'll eat. You'll regain your strength. And when I summon you, you'll come. Do you understand?" "Why?" "Because I command it." "That's not a reason." Kieran's jaw clenched. "You don't need a reason. You need only to obey." He turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Isla heard the lock click again, and she was alone. She sank back onto the bed, her hands shaking with the aftershock of adrenaline. What was she doing here? What did he want from her? And why did some small, traitorous part of her mind keep replaying the feeling of his touch on her skin? Days passed in strange isolation. Isla was given everything except freedom. Food appeared 3 times a day, rich abundant meals that made her stomach ache with their unfamiliarity. Clothes were provided, simple but well made, far better quality than anything she'd owned before. The bath was always hot, scented with oils that made her skin feel soft for the first time in years. But she was still a prisoner. Kieran came every evening, always alone, always unexpected. Sometimes he would simply sit in the chair by the fire and watch her with those pale, calculating eyes. Other times, he would ask her questions. "Tell me about your family. Why do you care?" "I don't. I'm curious," she told him, slowly. About her father, who'd been a carpenter, her mother, a teacher who'd insisted that all Omegas should learn to read and write, even though many believed it was unnecessary. Her younger brother, who'd been just 12 when he died. They were rebels? Kieran asked. They were people who wanted a better life. And look where it got them. Isla's hands clenched in her lap. Is that supposed to make me grateful to you? Grateful that I survived when they didn't? No. His expression was unreadable. I expect nothing from you but honesty. Then here's honesty. I hate you. She expected anger. Instead, something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Good, he said. Hatred is honest. It's the simpering loyalty I can't stand. People who pretend to love me because I hold their lives in my hands. Don't you want to be loved? Why would I want something so useless? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Love makes people weak, makes them vulnerable. My father loved my mother, and when she died, he lost himself. He made stupid decisions, showed mercy to enemies, let his grief rule him. That's what love does. It destroys you from within. Isla studied his face, seeing past the cold mask for the first time. Your mother was an Omega. Yes. Is that why you hate us? Because she left you? She didn't leave. His voice went flat. She died in childbirth. With my sister, who also died. Both of them gone because her biology made her weak. Understanding crashed over Isla like a wave. So you blame all Omegas for her death. I don't blame anyone. I simply recognize reality. He stood, moving to the window. Omegas are biologically vulnerable. That's not cruelty, it's fact. My mother was sweet and kind and gentle, and those things didn't save her. Weakness never saves anyone. She wasn't weak because she was an Omega, Isla said quietly. She was strong enough to love you, even knowing what the world was. That takes more courage than cruelty ever could. Kieran went very still. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he turned back to her. His expression closed off again. You should rest. Tomorrow you'll begin training. Training for what? For whatever I decide you're useful for. He left before she could respond. That night, Isla lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She was starting to understand something dangerous. Kieran wasn't just a monster. He was a person who'd been taught that love was weakness, that compassion was failure. Someone who'd built walls so high around himself that he couldn't see the prison he'd created. She should hate him. She did hate him for what he'd done to her people, to the kingdom. But she was also starting to pity him. And that, she suspected, was even more dangerous. The training Kieran mentioned turned out to be education. A tutor arrived the next morning, a severe-looking beta woman named Ms. Thorne, who handed Isla a stack of books and said, His Majesty believes you're intelligent enough to be worth educating properly. Prove him right or wrong. It makes no difference to me. Isla stared at the books. History, philosophy, strategy, mathematics. Why? I don't question His Majesty's orders. Neither should you. So Isla studied, not because Kieran commanded it, but because she'd always been hungry for knowledge. And in the sanctuary, there had been only a handful of battered texts to share among dozens of people. She devoured the books, staying up late into the night, making notes in the margins. Miss Thorne seemed surprised by her aptitude, though she never said so directly. Kieran continued his evening visits, but now He would sometimes quiz her on what she'd learned. "Tell me about the War of 7 Crowns." She recited the dates, the key battles, the political machinations. Then she said, "But the book doesn't mention what happened to the Omega populations during the war, because it wasn't relevant to the outcome." Wasn't it? Isla set down her book. 15,000 Omegas were forcibly conscripted to serve in the camps. Half of them died. The trauma decimated their communities for generations. But the history books only care about which Alpha General won which battle. Kieran tilted his head. "You think history should be written differently? I think history should be complete, not just the stories of those with power. Power is what shapes history. Power is what shapes which history gets told." She met his gaze. "That's not the same thing." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or interest. "You're angry. I'm always angry. I'm just usually smart enough to hide it." "Don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't hide it. I have enough people who lie to me." The weeks passed in a strange rhythm. Study during the day, conversations, arguments, really, with Kieran at night. He was brilliant, she had to admit, his mind sharp as a blade. But he was also deeply damaged, his worldview warped by trauma and isolation. She noticed small things, the way he never touched anyone if he could avoid it, the way he went rigid when one of the servants startled him, the nightmares. She could hear him sometimes, in the night, though his rooms were far from hers, muffled sounds of distress that he would never admit to in daylight. One evening, she found him standing at the window, staring out at the city below. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen before. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "do you know what day it is?" His voice was hollow. "The 15th of Frost Month. It's the anniversary of her death, my mother's." He didn't look at her. 23 years ago today. Isla approached slowly, like he was a wild animal that might bolt. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I barely remember her." "You remember enough to mark the day." His jaw clenched. "She used to sing. I remember that. Old Omega songs, lullabies. Her voice was..." He trailed off. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter." Isla stood beside him, looking out at the same view. "She matters. Your grief matters. Grief is weakness. Grief is love with nowhere to go." She spoke quietly. "It's not weakness to miss someone. It's human. I'm not interested in being human. I'm interested in being strong. What if those aren't opposites?" Kieran finally looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something crack in his expression, some carefully maintained wall showing its first fissure. "Why do you care?" he asked, and for the first time he sounded genuinely confused. "I'm your enemy. I've hurt your people. Why show me any kindness?" "Because someone has to." She held his gaze. "And because I think you're not as comfortable being cruel as you pretend to be. You know nothing about me. I know you come here every night instead of staying alone in your rooms. I know you've had the sanctuary's rations quietly restored. Yes, I found out. I know you make yourself into a monster because it's easier than admitting you're in pain." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not painfully, but firmly. "Don't. Don't what? Tell you the truth? Don't make me into something I'm not. I am what I am. I've done terrible things, Isla. Unforgivable things. Don't try to redeem me." "I'm not trying to redeem you." Her voice was steady. "I'm trying to see you, the real you, under all the armor." They stood there, frozen in the moment, his hand on her wrist and his eyes locked with hers. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Then Kieran released her and stepped back, his expression shuttering closed again. "This was a mistake," he said coldly. "You should never have been brought here." "Then let me go." "No." "Why not?" He turned away. "Because I don't want to." And then he was gone, leaving Isla alone with her racing heart and the terrible realization that something between them had shifted. She was starting to see past his cruelty to the wounded man beneath. And he, she suspected, was starting to see her as more than just another Omega to be dismissed. It was dangerous. It was foolish. And neither of them seemed able to stop it. Winter deepened, and the palace grew colder despite its many fires. Isla had been there for 2 months now, and the strange ritual of her days had become almost normal. Study, meals, conversations with a king who was slowly becoming less of a monster and more of a mystery. But the outside world hadn't forgotten her. "Your Majesty," Captain Dorian said, bowing in the doorway of Kieran's study. "We've received word from the Eastern Sanctuary. They're requesting information about the Omega you took. Several of them are concerned." Kieran didn't look up from his papers. "Tell them she's alive. That's all they need to know. They're asking for proof. They fear you've—" He cleared his throat. "Disposed of her." "Have I disposed of her, Captain?" "No, Your Majesty." "Then there's your proof." Kieran signed a document with a sharp flourish. "Anything else?" Dorian hesitated. "The court is talking, Your Majesty, about the Omega, about why she's here, what you intend for her. The court can speculate all they want. It's not their concern. Some of the nobles are suggesting you take her as a concubine. Given that she's an unmated Omega and you've kept her in the palace, then the nobles can mind their own business." Kieran's voice went cold. "Isla is not a concubine. She's not anything. She's—" He trailed off, seeming to realize he had no good answer. "What is she, Your Majesty?" Dorian asked quietly. Kieran was silent for a long moment. Then, "I don't know." That evening, when he came to Isla's room, he seemed agitated. He paced by the window, his movements restless, predatory. "Tell me something," he said abruptly. "If you could leave here, where would you go?" Isla set down her book. I don't know." "You don't know?" "My family is dead. The sanctuary was barely surviving even before you cut the rations. I have no skills beyond what I learned there, cooking, mending, tending the gardens." She tucked her knees up to her chest. "I have nowhere to go. You could go anywhere, with the right resources, the right support. Why are you asking me this?" He stopped pacing, his back to her. "Because I'm trying to understand why I brought you here, what I want from you." "Have you figured it out?" "No." He turned to face her. "You've been here for 2 months. I should have grown bored by now. Should have sent you back or forgotten about you entirely. But I haven't." "Maybe I'm just a shiny new toy," Isla said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Something different to play with until the novelty wears off." "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think." She stood, suddenly angry. "You kidnap me, imprison me in luxury, educate me, talk to me every night like I'm a real person, but I'm still your captive. I don't understand what you want from me, Kieran." It was the first time she'd used his name without the title. The intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "I want—" He crossed to her in 3 long strides. "I want you to look at me the way you do, like I'm not a monster. I want to hear you challenge me, argue with me, see through my masks. I want—" He stopped himself, jaw clenched, looking almost anguished. "You want to feel human again?" Isla finished softly. "I'm not human. I'm a king. You're both." She reached out, hesitated, then let her hand drop. "You're a king who's also a person who's lonely and hurt and pretending he's not. Stop." His voice cracked. "Stop trying to see good in me. I'm not looking for good. I'm looking at what's real. What's real is that I've killed hundreds of people, starved thousands more, enacted laws that have destroyed lives, including people you love. I'm not some tragic hero waiting to be saved, Isla. I'm a tyrant, and I chose to be one." "Why?" She moved closer. "Why did you choose it?" "Because strength is all that matters. Compassion gets you killed. Love destroys you. I watched my father fall apart after my mother died, and I swore I would never—" His breath hitched, and for the first time since she'd met him, Kieran looked vulnerable, genuinely, heartbreakingly vulnerable. You swore you'd never love anyone, Isla said, understanding flooding through her. Because you couldn't bear to lose them the way your father lost your mother. Don't psychoanalyze me. Then don't lie to yourself. She was standing right in front of him now, close enough to touch. You're not cruel because you're strong. You're cruel because you're terrified. I'm not. You are. You're terrified of being weak, of being hurt, of caring about anyone. So you push everyone away first. You make yourself into someone no one could possibly love, because that way you never have to risk feeling what your father felt. Kieran's hand came up, catching her face. His touch was gentle, trembling slightly. You don't understand. Then help me understand. I can't. His voice was barely a whisper. I can't let anyone close. It's not safe. I'm not safe. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. But I'm not. They stood there, his hand on her cheek, her heart hammering in her chest. The air between them was charged with something dangerous and inevitable. Isla, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. If I start this, if I let myself care about you, you already care, she said. That's why you're scared. His thumb traced her lower lip, and she saw the war in his eyes, the carefully constructed walls crumbling against something stronger. I don't know how to be gentle, he confessed. Then learn. He kissed her. Softly at first, almost tentatively, like he was afraid he'd break her or himself. But when she kissed him back, something in him seemed to shatter. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something desperate. Like he was drowning, and she was air. Like he'd been starving, and she was sustenance. Like he'd been alone in the dark for so long that her light was almost painful. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he whispered. Probably. I'm going to hurt you. Maybe. I don't know how to do this, how to be, whatever this is. Isla's hands came up to frame his face, forcing him to look at her. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. I'm not a good man, Isla. I don't need you to be good. She smiled, sad and hopeful at once. I just need you to try. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. And in that kiss, Isla felt the first real crack in the Ice King's armor. It would be a long road. There would be setbacks, arguments, moments where his old cruelty resurfaced out of habit or fear. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The Wolf King had finally met someone who didn't flinch from his teeth, and the broken Omega had found someone who saw her as more than her designation. Neither of them knew if they could heal each other, but for the first time in a long time, both of them wanted to try. News of the king's interest in the Omega spread through the palace like wildfire. By morning, the entire court knew that Kieran had spent most of the night in Isla's chambers, that he'd emerged looking different somehow, softer, more human, that when Lady Meredith had tried to engage him in conversation at breakfast, he'd actually smiled. The sharks began circling. Your Majesty, Lord Garrett said carefully, approaching Kieran in the war room where he was reviewing troop deployments. Might I have a word? Speak. The court is concerned about the Omega. Kieran's hand stilled on the map. Her name is Isla. Yes, Isla. Garrett cleared his throat. Some of the nobles worry that she may have undue influence over you. An Omega in the palace, with access to your private chambers. Are you suggesting she's manipulating me, Garrett? Kieran's voice was dangerously soft. I'm suggesting that appearances matter, Your Majesty. The kingdom is watching. Let them watch. My father is dead. Kieran looked up, his amber eyes cold. And I am not him. If the court has concerns, they can bring them to me directly, instead of sending you as their messenger. Dismissed. Garrett bowed and left, but Kieran could feel the weight of the court's judgment. They'd never questioned him before. His cruelty had been absolute, his will unbreakable. But now, showing even a hint of softness, of humanity. They smelled weakness. He found Isla in the library, curled up in a window seat with a book on pre-war treaties. She looked up as he entered, and her smile did something strange to his chest. "Reading about peace agreements?" he asked, sitting across from her. "Trying to understand how people used to solve problems without mass executions." She raised an eyebrow. "Radical, I know." Despite everything, he laughed. "You're incorrigible. You like it." "I do." He sobered. "Isla, we need to talk about what happened last night." Her expression grew guarded. "Are you regretting it?" "No, but the court knows, and they're not happy about it. Because I'm an Omega, because you're making me question everything I've built my reign on." He leaned forward. "They're afraid, not of you, but of what you represent. The possibility that their king might have a conscience after all." "And do you?" she asked quietly. "Have a conscience?" "I'm starting to remember that I do." He ran a hand through his hair. "For years, I've ruled through fear. It was simple, effective. But now I'm looking at the laws I've enacted, the suffering I've caused, and I'm seeing it through your eyes, and it's—" He swallowed hard. "It's unbearable." Isla set down her book and moved to sit beside him. "So change it." "It's not that simple." "Why not? You're the king. You made the laws. You can unmake them. And look weak to every enemy I've ever made." He shook his head. "The moment I show mercy, they'll see vulnerability. They'll strike. Or," Isla said, taking his hand, "they'll see a king who's strong enough to admit when he's wrong. That takes more courage than cruelty ever could." He studied their joined hands, her small scarred fingers intertwined with his larger ones. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy, but it's right." Before he could respond, the library doors burst open. Captain Dorian stood there, his face pale. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. The Northern Territories have sent an emissary. Duke Aldrich is demanding an audience." Kieran went rigid. "Aldrich, now. He claims he has intelligence about a plot against the crown. He insists on speaking with you immediately." Isla felt Kieran's hand tighten around hers. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Kieran, what's wrong?" Aldrich was my father's most trusted advisor. He's also the man I suspect poisoned him." Kieran stood, his expression hardening back into the cold mask she'd come to recognize. "If he's here, it's not for any good reason." The throne room was cold, despite the roaring fires in its massive hearths. Duke Aldrich was a silver-haired man in his 60s, distinguished and refined, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He bowed low as Kieran entered, flanked by his personal guard. "Your Majesty, it's been too long." "Not long enough, Aldrich." Kieran settled onto his throne, every inch the ruthless king his court expected. "You have information about a plot. Speak. Direct as always." Aldrich's smile widened. "Very well. I've learned that several of the southern lords are planning to move against you. They believe you've grown distracted, soft even. Is that so? There are rumors, Your Majesty, about an Omega, about how she's changed you, made you question your own laws." Aldrich's eyes glittered. "Some say you're thinking of reversing your edicts, showing mercy to those who don't deserve it." Kieran's expression remained impassive. "And where did you hear these rumors?" "Oh, rumors travel fast in a nervous court." Aldrich stepped closer. "I thought you should know what your enemies are saying, that you've gone the way of your father, letting sentiment cloud your judgment. My father was weak. Was he, or was he simply human?" Aldrich tilted his head. "He loved your mother deeply. When she died, yes, it wounded him. But that love also made him a better king in many ways, more just, more merciful. Mercy is weakness. Is it?" Aldrich's voice was silk and poison. "Or is it what separates a king from a tyrant?" The throne room went deadly quiet. No one spoke to Kieran this way. No one dared. You overstep, Aldrich. I speak truth, as I always have. Your father understood that fear alone cannot hold a kingdom forever. Eventually, people stop being afraid and start being desperate, and desperate people revolt. He gestured broadly. You've seen it yourself. How many rebellions have you crushed in 7 years? 10, 15, and I'll crush 15 more if I must. Or you could stop creating them in the first place. Aldrich's expression grew serious. I served your father for 30 years. I watched him rule with both strength and compassion. The kingdom prospered. People were loyal, not from fear, but from genuine respect. And yet someone still poisoned him, Kieran said coldly. Tell me, Aldrich, where were you the night he died? Ah. Aldrich smiled sadly. You still believe I killed him? You were alone with him that evening. You brought him his wine. By morning, he was dead. I did bring him wine, and I've regretted it every day since. Aldrich's mask slipped, showing something that looked almost like genuine grief. But I didn't poison it, Your Majesty. Someone else did. Someone who wanted you on the throne instead of your father. Someone who knew you would rule with an iron fist. You're lying. Am I? Think, Kieran. Who benefited most from your father's death? Who whispered in your ear about strength and power? Who encouraged every brutal law, every harsh edict? Kieran's jaw clenched. Get out. Not until you hear the truth. Your father was going to announce reforms, protections for Omegas, limits on noble power, redistribution of wealth. The old guard couldn't allow it, so they killed him and put you, young, angry, traumatized, on the throne. They knew you'd be easy to manipulate. I said, get out. Kieran rose from his throne, his voice echoing off the stone walls. I'm trying to save you from making the same mistake he did, Aldrich said urgently, but not by telling you to be cruel, by telling you to be smart. The Omega's Isla, isn't it? She's showing you another way. Don't let fear make you reject it. Kieran gestured sharply, and guards seized Aldrich by both arms. You'll be kept in the guest quarters under watch, Kieran said, his voice like ice. If I find proof you're plotting against me, you'll hang. If you're telling the truth about the Southern Lords, you'll live. But speak to me about my personal affairs again, and I'll have your tongue. As the guards dragged Aldrich away, the Duke called back, She's good for you, boy. Don't throw away your humanity because you're afraid of being your father. The doors slammed shut, and Kieran stood alone in the throne room, his hands shaking with rage or fear or something he couldn't name. Isla was pacing her room when Kieran finally returned, hours later. He looked exhausted, the hard mask cracking at the edges. What happened? She asked. Nothing. Everything. I don't know. He sank into the chair by the fire, his head in his hands. Aldrich suggested I was being manipulated, that my father's murder was orchestrated by people who wanted me on the throne specifically because they knew I'd be cruel. Isla knelt in front of him, her hands on his knees. Do you believe him? I don't know what to believe anymore. He looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. What if he's right? What if I've spent 7 years being exactly what they wanted me to be? A puppet tyrant, thinking I was strong while they pulled my strings. Then you stop being their puppet. She squeezed his knees. You make your own choices, starting now. It's not that simple. It is that simple. It's just not easy. She stood, pulling him up with her. Kieran, you're not your father. You're not weak for caring about people. You're not vulnerable for wanting to be better. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen you, the real you, under all the armor, and that person isn't a monster. She cupped his face in her hands. That person is scared and hurt and trying so hard to protect himself that he's forgotten what he's protecting. Kieran pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. For a long moment, they just held each other, and she felt the tremors running through his large frame. I don't know how to do this, he whispered against her hair, how to be strong and soft at the same time. You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just Start small. One law, one mercy at a time. He pulled back to look at her. If I change the Omega protection laws, the nobles will revolt. Let them. People will die. People are dying now. Under your current laws, Omegas are dying in the work camps, in the sanctuaries, in the streets. At least, if you change things, they'll die fighting for something better instead of just surviving. He studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. You're right. I know. Despite everything, he smiled. Arrogant. I learned from the best. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart, there was determination in his eyes. Tomorrow, he said, I'll convene the council. We're rewriting the Omega protection laws. The council will fight you. Let them try. The council chamber erupted in chaos. This is madness. Lord Garrett slammed his hand on the table. Your Majesty, you cannot simply overturn centuries of tradition. I can, and I will. Kieran's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The Omega Protection Act is hereby repealed. In its place, we'll institute the Equal Rights Decree. Omegas will have the same legal protections as betas and alphas. The work camps will be converted to voluntary employment with fair wages. The sanctuaries will receive full funding. This is that Omega's influence, Duchess Ravenna spat. She's bewitched you. Careful, Kieran said softly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Speak about Isla with respect, or don't speak at all. So it's true. Lord Garrett looked genuinely shocked. You've bonded with her. I haven't bonded with anyone, but yes, she's shown me the flaws in my own laws, flaws I was too proud or too blind to see before. Your Majesty, please. Garrett's voice turned pleading. Think about what you're doing. Your reign has been built on strength, on absolute authority. If you show weakness now, I'm not showing weakness, I'm showing growth. Kieran leaned forward. For 7 years, I've ruled through fear. And what has it gotten me? Rebellions, plots, a kingdom held together by terror rather than loyalty. Is that strength? Or is it just another form of weakness? It's kept you alive, Duchess Ravenna said bluntly. Has it? Or has it just kept me isolated? He looked around the table. I have no allies, no friends, no one I can trust, because everyone is too afraid of me to be honest. That's not power, that's a prison. So you'll throw it all away for an Omega? Garrett asked. I'll change it because it's right. Isla simply helped me see that. The council dissolved into argument again, but Kieran let them shout themselves hoarse. When they finally quieted, he spoke. This is not a discussion. This is an announcement. The decree will be signed tomorrow and enacted immediately. Any noble who refuses to comply will be stripped of their titles and lands. Any noble who harms an Omega in retaliation will be executed. You'll start a civil war, Ravenna warned. Then we'll have a civil war, but we'll have it over something that matters. He stood, ending the meeting. As the nobles filed out, muttering darkly, Captain Dorian approached. Your Majesty, I should warn you. Duke Aldrich was telling the truth about the Southern Lords. We've intercepted communications. They're planning to move against you within the month. Let them come. Your Majesty, Dorian, I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of ruling through fear. If they want to challenge me, they can do it in the open. I'm done with shadows and poison. Dorian studied his king for a long moment. Then he smiled. You've changed, Your Majesty. Is that a bad thing? No, sir. I think it might be the best thing that's happened to this kingdom in a long time. News of the decree spread like wildfire through the kingdom. In the sanctuaries, Omegas wept with relief and disbelief. In the noble houses, lords and ladies plotted in whispers. In the streets, people argued about whether their king had gone mad or finally come to his senses. And in the palace, Ela watched Kieran work late into the night, rewriting laws, drafting proclamations, preparing for the backlash he knew was coming. You should rest, she said, bringing him tea. I can't. There's too much to do. He rubbed his eyes. I'm trying to undo 7 years of cruelty in 7 days. It's not enough time. It's a start. She sat on the edge of his desk. Kieran, you know they're going to fight this. I know. People might die. I know that too. He looked up at her. But people are already dying. At least now they'll die for something better. She smiled sadly. You're using my own words against me. You're a bad influence. The worst. He pulled her into his lap, and she went willingly, curling against his chest. For a moment, they just sat there, finding comfort in each other's presence. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Me too. What if I'm making a mistake? What if Aldrich was wrong, and showing mercy just makes me vulnerable? Then you'll deal with it. But Kieran... She tilted his face to look at her. You were already vulnerable. You just didn't know it. All those walls you built, all that cruelty, it didn't protect you. It just made you lonely. And now you're still vulnerable. But at least you're not alone. He kissed her softly. Stay with me tonight? Always. But their peace was short-lived. The attack came at dawn. Isla woke to the sound of steel on steel, shouts echoing through the palace corridors. Kieran was already up, dressed, buckling on his sword. What's happening? She asked, fear sharp in her throat. The southern lords. They've attacked earlier than expected. His face was grim. Stay here. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Dorian. Kieran. He kissed her hard and fast. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Isla. And then he was gone, running toward the sound of battle. Isla stood frozen, his words echoing in her mind. Then she moved, not to bar the door, but to follow him. If he thought she was going to hide while he fought for the kingdom, for their future together, he was mistaken. She'd been silent for too long, invisible for too long. It was time to stop hiding. The throne room had become a battleground. Duke Aldrich had been right. The southern lords had moved against Kieran, but not alone. They'd brought mercenaries, hired swords with no loyalty beyond gold. The palace guards were outnumbered, fighting desperately to hold the main corridors. Kieran fought like the wolf they'd named him for, swift, brutal, efficient. His sword was red with blood, his face splattered with it, but his eyes were clear and cold. Surrender, Kieran, Lord Garrett shouted from across the room. He'd thrown in with the rebels, his face twisted with betrayal. You've gone mad. We're saving the kingdom from your weakness. My weakness? Kieran's laugh was sharp. You're so afraid of change that you'd rather see the kingdom burn than admit you were wrong. They clashed again, steel ringing against steel. That's when Isla entered. She'd armed herself with a heavy iron candlestick from the hallway, and though she'd never held a weapon in her life, desperation gave her courage. A mercenary saw her, small, alone, clearly an Omega, and smiled cruelly. Lost little thing? Isla swung the candlestick with all her strength. It connected with his temple, and he went down hard. She stared at his unconscious form, shocked at what she'd done. Isla! Kieran's voice sharp with fear. What are you doing here? Helping. She ducked as another mercenary lunged at her, and Kieran's sword took the man down before he could reach her. You were supposed to stay in your room, and you were supposed to not get killed. She grabbed a fallen sword, holding it awkwardly. I'm not hiding while you fight alone. You don't know how to use that. Look out. A mercenary was charging at her back. Isla spun, but she was too slow. The sword was coming down. And then Dorian was there, his blade intercepting the blow. Get her out of here, Kieran roared. Like hell, Isla shot back. She might not know how to fight, but she could help. She saw a guard pinned by 2 mercenaries and threw her candlestick at one of them. It hit, distracting him long enough for the guard to recover. The battle raged around them, chaos and blood and the ring of steel. Isla found herself back to back with Kieran, his presence solid and reassuring. You're impossible, he said. You love me anyway. Yes, I do, That's when Lord Garrett made his move. While Kieran was distracted, Garrett lunged, his blade aimed straight for the king's heart. Isla saw it happening, as if in slow motion, saw the trajectory, the intention, saw that Kieran wouldn't turn in time. She didn't think, she just moved. The blade meant for Kieran's heart caught her in the shoulder instead. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and terrible. She heard Kieran's roar of rage, saw him cut Garrett down with a single brutal strike. Then she was on the ground, Kieran kneeling beside her, his hands pressing against the wound. "No, no, no," he was chanting, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, Isla, stay with me." "I'm okay," she gasped, though she wasn't sure that was true. "You're okay. That's what matters. You stupid, brave, impossible woman." Tears streaked through the blood on his face. "Why did you do that?" "Because I love you too." She smiled weakly. "Thought you should know." The world was getting fuzzy at the edges. She heard Kieran shouting for healers, felt him lift her carefully. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was his face, beautiful and terrified, looking at her like she was his whole world. And she thought it was worth it. She woke to soft sunlight and the sound of quiet breathing. Isla opened her eyes slowly, her shoulder throbbing with dull pain. She was in bed, her bed in the palace, with clean bandages wrapped around her upper body, and slumped in the chair beside her, clearly having refused to leave, was Kieran. He looked terrible, days of stubble on his jaw, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes rumpled and blood-stained. But he was alive, and whole, and beautiful. "Kieran," she whispered. His eyes snapped open immediately, and in an instant he was at her bedside, his hand finding hers. "You're awake. Thank the gods, you're awake." He pressed his forehead to their joined hands. "It's been 3 days. The healers said you'd be fine, but you wouldn't wake up, and I thought, I'm okay." She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "What happened? The battle?" "We won. Barely." He looked up at her, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "Garrett is dead. The surviving lords have surrendered. Duke Aldrich fought with us. Apparently he'd been gathering evidence against the conspirators for months. He's being reinstated to the council. And the decree stands. The equal rights decree is law." A faint smile crossed his face. Funny how a near coup makes the nobles much more willing to compromise. "Kieran." She reached up to touch his face. "You did it. You really did it. We did it. Isla, you saved my life." His voice cracked. "You took a blade meant for me. You could have died. But I didn't. But you could have. And the thought of losing you..." He shook his head, unable to finish. "Hey." She made him look at her. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You'd better not, because I'm not letting you out of my sight ever again." He leaned down carefully, mindful of her injury, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "When you collapsed, I realized something. I've spent my whole life afraid of being weak, afraid of loving someone because I might lose them. But losing you would destroy me anyway, so I might as well love you while I have you." That's very romantic in a morbid sort of way. He laughed, and it sounded like relief. "I'm not good at this. You're learning." Over the next weeks, as Isla healed, the kingdom began to change. The work camps were dismantled, replaced with voluntary employment centers where Omegas could find work with fair wages. The sanctuaries received full funding and were converted into schools and training facilities. Omega children were given access to education alongside alphas and betas. It wasn't perfect. There was resistance, resentment from those who'd benefited from the old system. But Kieran held firm, enforcing the new laws with the same iron will he'd once used for cruelty. "The difference," Isla said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, "is that now you're using your strength to protect people instead of control them." He pulled her close, careful of her healing shoulder. "You know the court wants me to make you my official consort. And what do you want? I want you to be my queen." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Not because you're an Omega and I'm an Alpha, but because you're the bravest, most infuriating, most extraordinary person I've ever met. You make me want to be better. You make me believe I can be." Isla's eyes filled with tears. "Kieran, I know it's complicated. I know I have a terrible reputation and a kingdom that's barely holding together. I know I'm still learning how to be gentle, how to be good, but I'm asking anyway." He knelt before her, there in the garden where anyone might see. "Will you marry me? Will you be my queen and help me build a kingdom worth living in?" She pulled him to his feet, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, and it tasted like hope and new beginnings. 5 years later, the kingdom was almost unrecognizable. Kieran still ruled with strength, but it was tempered now with wisdom and compassion. The rebellions had ceased, not because people were afraid, but because they had hope. The economy had stabilized, the territories prospered, and beside him, always, was Queen Isla. She'd become beloved by the people, the Omega Queen who'd shown them that strength came in many forms. She worked tirelessly for education reform, healthcare access, and protections for the vulnerable. She'd even established a council of Omegas to advise the crown on policies that affected their communities. "You're doing it again," Kieran said, finding her in her study late one night, surrounded by papers. "Doing what?" "Working until you fall asleep at your desk." He scooped her up, ignoring her protests. "Come to bed. But the education proposal will still be there tomorrow." He carried her toward their chambers. "You need rest. So do you. Then we'll rest together." In their private rooms, away from the weight of the crown, they were just Kieran and Isla, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something bright. "Do you ever regret it?" Isla asked, curled against his chest. "Changing everything?" "No." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Do you regret speaking out that day in the sanctuary?" "Not for a second. Even though I kidnapped you and held you prisoner? Even though, because that's how I met the real you. Under all the armor and cruelty, I found someone worth knowing, someone worth loving, someone worth everything." They fell asleep like that, the cruel Alpha King who'd learned to be gentle and the broken Omega who'd taught him how. Outside, the kingdom slept peacefully, no longer held together by fear, but by the promise of something better. They'd both been damaged by their pasts, shaped by trauma and loss, but they'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found a way forward. The old stories said Omegas were weak and Alphas were strong, but Isla and Kieran had written a new story, one where strength and gentleness could coexist, where power could be wielded with compassion, and where love could heal even the deepest wounds. They weren't perfect. They still argued, still struggled with the weight of the crown and the demands of the kingdom. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. In the end, history would remember King Kieran not as the Wolf King or the tyrant, but as the ruler who learned to be human again. And beside him, they would remember Queen Isla, the Omega who roared. Together, they'd built a kingdom worth believing in, and together they lived, not happily ever after, because life was never that simple, but richly, deeply, truly, and that was enough.